The girl was already dead by the time I understood what I had done. Not dead the way mortals die, sudden, final, merciful. Dead the way a candle dies, when someone cups their hand around the flame and simply waits. I had let him in. That is the whole story. Everything else, the child, the symbols, the rain, the sealed door is just the shape of what that one decision carved into the world. What do you do when the thing that destroys you arrives without a weapon? When it arrives with a wounded child in its arms and rain in its hair, and the exact words you stopped believing anyone would ever say to you again. What do you do when the danger doesn't feel like danger, when it feels, for the first time in 300 years, like being seen? I had watched empires fall for allowing less than what I allowed. I knew what patient cruelty looked like. I had turned men to stone for less provocation than a kind word at the wrong hour. Still, I opened the gate. I stepped back. I said, "Come in, you are safe here." He wasn't the threat. I was. If this story pulled you in, like the video and follow Medusa's Memories. Tell us, what state are you listening from? Soren arrived on the 43rd night of rain. He didn't knock. He stood at the outer gate with a child pressed against his chest. And he wet Culpace, not Colradine would come to the window. As if he had calculated exactly how long a woman who has lived 3 centuries alone will take to move toward a light in the dark. I came to the window, I looked down. The child's left arm hung at a wrong angle. Not broken, dislocated, wrenched outward from the shoulder socket with the specific violence of someone grabbed and dragged. The man, holding her, had both arms wrapped around her back, keeping her upright, and his face was turned down and away from mine. He was not looking at me. That was the first thing I noticed. Every man who has ever come to this gate has looked up immediately, searching for the monster, cataloging the serpents, bracing for the gaze. This one kept his eyes on the child. I opened the gate. The serpents in my hair was still. Threnody, the oldest, the one who coils closest to my left ear, did not move. She watches strangers the way water watches stone, patient, certain, waiting to find the flaw. She was watching him. She said nothing. The rain smelled of iron and river mud. He came through the gate without speaking, and I saw his hands clearly in the torchlight. No weapons, no rings, no marks. His robe was temple cloth, but old, worn at the hem, and the insignia had been removed, not cut away. Unpicked, carefully, thread by thread. Someone had taken time to make him look like no one. Her shoulder, he said. First words. Not, thank you, her shoulder. His priority, stated before his name. I reached for the child and she flinched, and the sound she made, small, exhausted. The sound of a body that has been afraid for so long it no longer has the energy to scream. That sound moved something in me that I should have kept still. I set my hands on her shoulder. The joint slid back into place in 3 seconds. She gasped, exhaled. She needs water, I said. And warmth. Come. I turned and walked inside, and I heard his footsteps follow, and that, the ease of it, the simplicity. The way he followed without hesitation and I led without thinking, that was the first mistake. Not dramatic, not visible. Just a door, opened without ceremony, and to people walking through it as if it had always been inevitable. The temple at night runs on its own logic. The torches in the outer hall burn amber. The ones in the inner corridor burn blue-white. Fed by oil pressed from a plant that no longer grows anywhere outside these walls. The child, I would learn her name was Lyra, stared at the blue light with her mouth slightly open and her good hand pressed flat against her sternum. The way children do when something is too large to process and the body defaults to checking its own heartbeat. Soren looked at the walls. Not at the tapestries, not at the altar alcoves, not at me. At the walls themselves. At the places where the stone had been worked with symbols, old marks, pre-language, carved by hands that had belonged to a version of this world that no longer existed. He looked at them the way a man looks at a text he is trying to memorize before someone takes the book away. I noticed. I filed it. I did not act on it. That is the thing about the mistakes that ruin you. They are never invisible. You see them. You simply decide, in the moment, that there is a more generous explanation. That the man who studies your walls is curious, not calculating. That curiosity is not the same as threat. He accepted soup. He accepted a blanket for the child. He told me his name, Soren, a northern name, uncommon in this region, and a version of how they came to be on my road at night in the rain. Persecution, he said. The order he had served had dissolved and its members scattered. He had taken Lyra from a family that could no longer keep her safe. Whose child is she? I asked. Mine now, he said. Not she belongs to me, mine now. Present tense. A claim made in the moment of speaking, as if it required only the act of saying. I looked at Lyra. She had fallen asleep, sitting up, her head against his arm, her dislocated shoulder already moving freely. The joint settling back into its socket the way healed things do, quietly, without drama, as if nothing had ever been wrong. She had brown eyes, I would see later. But in that light, at that angle, they looked almost ember. You can stay until the rain passes, I said. He nodded once. Didn't thank me, looked at the wall behind my head. The rain didn't pass. It stayed 3 days. And on the second day, I made the second mistake. I stopped watching the walls when he was in the room, because I had begun watching him instead. The way he spoke to Lyra. The patience of it, the consistency, the particular gentleness of someone who has learned to be careful because they have seen what careless does to small things. I recognized it. I had no business recognizing it. Recognition is intimacy's first step, and intimacy in a place like this, between a woman like me and a man who studies walls, is not a gift. It is a breach. On the third morning, Lyra woke before dawn and came to find me in the outer garden, where I sit when the dark is thinning and the serpents are restless, and I need to be somewhere that has no ceiling. She sat beside me on the stone bench without asking permission, which meant she had already calculated that I would not send her away. He said, "You're not dangerous," she told me. "He's wrong," I said. She considered this with the seriousness of a child who has already learned that adults tell two kinds of truth. The kind meant to protect and the kind meant to inform. She was sorting which kind mine was. He said, "You're lonely." She sighed then. The serpents moved. Threnody uncurled from behind my left ear and extended forward, just slightly, not a strike position, not aggression. The posture of something paying attention. I said nothing. Lyra pulled her knees to her chest. The healed shoulder moved without restriction. In the gray light before sunrise, she looked like every child I have ever watched grow old from a distance, already containing the adult they would become. Already carrying something they didn't know yet they were carrying. "Are you going to make him leave?" she asked. "When the rain passes," I said. She nodded, looked at the garden, and then, very quietly, so quietly that I would wonder later if I had imagined it, she said, "He knows more about this place than you think he does." I turned to look at her. But she had already stood, already turned back toward the door. And the things she'd said hung in the air between us like smoke, visible, dissipating, impossible to hold. The rain passed on the fourth morning. I stood at the gate and felt the air change, that specific shift when a storm lifts and the world contracts back to its actual size. The mud in the outer courtyard was ankle deep. The torches in the garden had drowned sometime in the night. Soren was already awake. He was standing in the inner corridor, not the sanctum, not yet, but the corridor that leads to it, with his back to me and one hand pressed, flat against the wall at the point where the first series of symbols begins. Not tracing them, pressing, palm flat, still, as if listening for a pulse inside the stone. Threnody went rigid against my skull. "That corridor is not for guests," I said. He turned. His face was composed, not startled, not guilty, arranged. The face of someone who had prepared for this moment and chosen an expression in advance. "I heard something," he said. "A sound from the wall." I thought. "No," I said. "You didn't." He held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back from the wall, and I watched his hand leave the stone slowly. "The way someone releases something they are not done with. We'll leave today," he said, "after Lyra eats." I nodded. I did not move from the corridor entrance. And he walked past me, close, closer than necessary in the width of that passage, and I smelled stone dust on his palm as he passed. The specific gray smell of the inner wall, which has a mineral composition found nowhere else in this structure. He had been touching those walls long enough to carry their scent. I went to Lyra first. She was in the small room off the outer hall, sitting cross-legged on the sleeping mat, eating dried figs from the bowl I'd left the night before. The shoulder moved normally. But when I crouched beside her and looked at the joint in the early light, I saw it, faint, barely there. The way a candle shows through fabric, a trace of luminescence under the skin, thread-thin, gold-adjacent. The temple was already learning her. "Hold still," I said. She held still. I placed her fingers at the joint and pressed, not hard, just enough to feel the current beneath. It was there. Slow, rhythmic, already synchronized to the pulse of the outer sanctum wall. The healing had gone too deep. I had worked too fast, too thoroughly, too generously. And now the temple's energy had followed the repair like water follows a channel someone forgot to close. I had for hours, maybe 5, before the bond set permanently. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "No," she said. "It feels warm." That was the problem. It would always feel warm. It would feel like belonging. And belonging, for a child who had been dragged through rain by a man with a prepared expression, would feel like the only safe thing in the world. I sat back on my heels. "Lyra," I said, "how long have you known Soren?" She ate a fig, considered. "A while," she said. "Weeks? Months? He doesn't like me to count." I looked at her. She looked at the figs. "Why not?" I asked. She picked up another fig, turned it over in her fingers. "He says counting makes time feel small," she said. "He says some things are bigger than time." The serpents, in my hair, had been still since the corridor. Now Vex, the small one, copper-scaled, who coils at the crown of my head and is the first to move when something is wrong, began to unwind slowly, her head turning toward the door. Toward the sound of footsteps in the outer hall. Soren was packing. I stood. "Stay here," I told Lyra. "Eat." He had almost nothing to pack. That was the second thing I should have registered earlier. A man traveling with a child, in flight from a dissolved order, should have had supplies. A bag of some weight. Tools, documents, provisions. He had a single satchel, worn thin, and it was already closed by the time I entered the outer hall. "You said after she eats," I said. "She's eating," he said. He lifted the satchel. "I'll wait outside." What's in the satchel? Not a question. He heard it as one anyway. What a man carries, he said. Coin, a letter, a change of cloth. Open it." The pause was exactly one breath long. He set the satchel on the hall table and undid the clasp, and stepped back. Arms slightly out, the gesture of a man demonstrating he has nothing to hide. Inside, cloth, folded. A small leather purse, a sealed letter with a mark I didn't recognize. And beneath all of it, wrapped in the cloth, a flat piece of stone, grey, palm-sized, broken at one edge, from the inner corridor wall. The fragment was small, barely a hand's width. But the symbol on it was complete, one of the sealing marks, the ones that govern the containment structure of the sanctum. The ones that, if replicated precision and enact by the right invocation, could be used to lock the temple's own energy against itself. The room went very quiet. "That belongs to this temple," I said. "I found it on the floor," he said. "It must have fallen." "Stone doesn't fall from these walls." He looked at me. His eyes were steady. Not afraid. Steady. The way a man is steady when he has already decided what he will do if the conversation goes wrong. "Give me the stone," I said. He reached into the satchel. He did not give me the stone. He ran. Not toward the gate, toward the inner sanctum corridor, the direction he'd already been moving when I found him at dawn. Fast. Faster than a man carrying a child's satchel should move. The speed of someone who has mapped a route in advance and is now executing it. He hit the corridor entrance at a full sprint, and I was 3 steps behind him, and the torches in the passage flared blue-white as he passed. The stone fragment in his hand resonating with the symbols on the wall, singing to them, the frequency of recognition between a carved mark and its replica. He knew exactly where he was going. Threnody struck the air beside my face, not at him, at me, a redirect, pointing left. There was a junction in the corridor I hadn't needed in years, a cut-through that emerged ahead of the sanctum entrance. I turned left, ran. The stone floor was cold through my sandals, and the blue torches blurred at the edges of my vision, and I could hear his footsteps ahead, the rhythm of them, and then I heard them stop. I came through the junction, and he was standing at the sanctum door. Not trying to open it. Standing with the fragment pressed to the surface of the door and his mouth moving. Words. Specific words. The invocation that activates a sealing symbol when pressed to a resonant surface. He had memorized the inscription. Somehow, in the 3 days he had been in this temple, he had memorized the activation sequence for a mark that should have been impossible to read without years of training. I grabbed his wrist. He turned. And for the first time, his expression was not prepared. It was something else. Not guilt, not fear. Something that looked almost like apology, which was worse than either. "Don't," I said. "I have to," he said. I took the fragment from his hand. He let me. That was when I realized the fragment wasn't the point. The fragment was already copied. What he was pressing against the door wasn't the original stone. It was a wax impression, a perfect cast, made at some point in the 3 days he had been here, while I had been watching him instead of watching the walls. The original fragment, with the symbol carved into living stone, was still in the satchel, which Lyra was sitting next to. In the room I had left her in, alone. I ran back through the junction corridor. The outer hall was empty. There's no small room above though, the sleeping mafia. Lyra was gone to set. The original stone fragment was gone. I stood in the middle of the empty room and heard the gate close. Not slam, close, quietly. The way someone closes a gate who has done this before, who knows that the sound of violence draws attention and the sound of ordinary departure does not. The latch caught with a soft, final click. I walked to the gate, opened it. The road was empty in both directions. I want to tell you that I moved immediately. That I sprinted into the road, that the serpents guided me, that I found them within the hour. What I actually did was stand at the open gate for longer than I should have and feel the specific quality of the silence that follows a betrayal you saw coming and allowed anyway. It is a different silence from the one that follows surprise. Surprise silence is loud. It rings. It has edges. It demands action. This silence was soft. It settled into the spaces between things. It had been there before. I realized, in the 3 days he had been here, in the moments I had chosen the generous interpretation. This silence was just the accumulated weight of every small permission I had granted, finally landing all at once. Threnody coiled tight against my skull. I closed the gate, went back inside. The stone floor of the outer hall held his footprints, mud from the courtyard, tracked in on the first night, and never fully dry since. I followed them with my eyes, from the entrance, to the corridor, to the small room back again, overlapping, patterned. A man who had walked this same route many times, learning it, measuring it, until it was no longer a strange space, but a known one. He had spent 3 days mapping my home. The dilemma opened into directions and both were real. Go after them now. Follow into the open road. Find them before the stone fragment reaches whoever had sent him. Break the copy before it could be activated. But Lyra was with him. And if I pursued and he knew I was coming, if he had planned for pursuit, which a man who plans for everything surely had, then Lyra became leverage. She was already leverage. She had always been leverage. I had just spent 3 days pretending otherwise, or stay, contain the sanctum. Prepare the counter-inscription. Wait for him to attempt activation from the outside, and be ready when the seal turned back on itself. But the fragment was already out, and the order that had sent him, whatever remained of the order that had sent him, would have a copy within days, regardless of whether Soren activated anything. There was no good path. There was only, which damage do I choose? The sanctum door opened. Not the outer door, the inner one. The one I had just left Soren standing in front of. The one he had pressed the wax impression against. It swung inward, slowly, on its own, and the sound it made was the sound of a seal releasing, a low, resonant crack, like ice giving way in spring. He had activated it. Not then, not in the corridor when I grabbed his wrist. He had activated it before. The wax impression had been a misdirection. He'd pressed it to the outer surface, while the real cast was already inside, already placed against the inner wall where I couldn't see it. He had laid the trap before I found him. The confrontation in the corridor had been designed to pull me away from the sanctum entrance long enough for the activation to complete. The door stood open, and the seal, the containment, structure carved into the living stone of the inner threshold, was running in reverse, pushing outward instead of holding inward, using the temple's own energy to build pressure against the gate, against the outer walls, against every exit. I had 20 minutes, possibly 30, before the outer gate locked. I looked at the open sanctum door. The symbols on the threshold were glowing, not the blue-white of the torches. Something darker, the color of a bruise in the first hour. They pulsed with the temple's own rhythm, which meant the structure itself was being used as the activation engine. This was not a lock from outside. It was a conversion from within. He hadn't sealed me in. He had taught the temple to seal itself. Lyra. I kept coming back to Lyra, the child who had told me, in the grey morning light, that Soren knew more about this place than I thought he did. Who had said it quietly, almost accidentally, and then walked away before I could ask what she meant. Had she been warning me? Or had she been testing whether the warning would change anything? Checking. On his behalf, footage problem. I still not know. That is the worst part. The part that stays. The part that the years don't erode. Not what he did. What she might have been. Because if she was a child who tried to warn me and I didn't listen properly, then I failed her. And if she was a child trained to test me, then she was already a casualty before she arrived at my gate. And I failed her in a different way that started the moment I let sentiment override sight. Both versions of Lyra are real. They live in the same memory. The dilemma, the counter-inscription was in the sanctum. To get it, I had to enter a space, now actively working against me. And to enter the sanctum meant leaving the outer hall unwatched, leaving the last window of time before the gate locked unguarded, in case there was something else he had planned that I hadn't found yet. One chose the sanctum, which meant I had already chosen to trust that the outer hall held nothing I hadn't seen. I was 3 steps inside the sanctum when I heard a sound from behind me, from the outer hall, from the direction of the gate, not the gate locking. A footstep, 1 footstep, careful, and then silence. Someone was still in the temple. I turned. A woman stood in the outer hall doorway. Not a girl, a woman, middle-aged, dressed in temple gray, with a scholar's satchel across one shoulder and both hands visible and open at her sides. She was looking directly at me, with the specific expression of someone who has spent time preparing for how frightening this moment would be, and has arrived at the conclusion that it is still more frightening than they prepared for. She did not look away. That took something. "I was in the archive room," she said. "I've been here since yesterday." The archive room, a small chamber off the outer hall's east wall, used for storage, which I had not checked since Soren arrived because I had been occupied with other presences. She had been in my temple for a full day without my knowledge, and the fact of that landed somewhere between my ribs like a cold stone. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Desta." She kept her hands open. I came ahead of him. "To warn you." And then he arrived faster than I expected, and I couldn't get to you without him seeing me. "You were in my temple for a day," I said. "Without my permission, without my knowledge." "Yes," she said. "No justification, just the fact." The serpents were reading her. Threnody was forward, threat posture, but not strike posture. Vex, at the crown of my head, was very still. The stillness Vex goes to when something is complicated, rather than simply dangerous. "Why does he want the symbols?" I said. "He doesn't." She took 1 step into the hall. "He was sent to retrieve a map. The symbols are secondary. What the Order wants is the location of the chamber beneath the sanctum, the one that isn't on any existing document. The one you sealed 400 years ago. The floor felt different under my feet. There is a chamber beneath the sanctum. I sealed it the year this temple was built, for reasons that no one living has ever been told, because no one living needed to know. It exists in no document. I did not carve it into any symbol, did not record it in any inscription, did not tell any person across for centuries of having people in and out of this space. How does he know about that chamber? I said. He doesn't, Desta said. Not specifically, but the Order does. They've known for 200 years. They don't know where it is, just that it exists, and that the sealing symbols on the sanctum threshold are a map to its location, if read in reverse sequence. She paused. He wasn't copying the symbols. He was reading the map. The outer gate locked. Not gradually, immediately, the way a held breath releases. A single deep concussion that moved through the floor and up through my feet and into the bones of my legs, and did not stop moving until it reached the base of my skull. The serpents went rigid. All of them, simultaneously. A full-body lock that I have only felt twice before in 300 years, both times in earthquakes. The temple walls began to resonate, not loudly. A low, structural hum, the sound of energy that has nowhere to go, circling. The blue-white torches in the corridor flared and held and flared again. The bruise-colored light from the sanctum threshold pulsed outward in a slow wave that washed the floor and receded and came again. I was sealed inside my own temple. "The counter-inscription," I said. "Where is it?" "The altar base," Desta said. "East face, third register from the bottom." But I was already moving. Into the sanctum, the force of it hit me at the threshold. A pressure like walking into wind, but coming from all directions simultaneously. Pressing at the chest and the shoulders and the top of the skull. The bruise light pulsed against my skin. The serpents made a sound I have no name for, not hissing, something lower, a vibration that I felt in my jaw. I walked through it. The altar was 10 paces from the door. Each pace cost something, not pain, not exactly, but resistance. The way swimming through cold water costs, more than walking the same distance on land. My own temple pushing against me, its energy converted to opposition. The thing I had built for protection now, running in reverse, and using every stored year of accumulated power to do it. 7 paces, 8, Desta's footstep behind me. She had followed me in. Which was either brave or strategic, and I had no time to determine which. 9 paces. I reached the altar. Dropped to my knees on the stone floor. East face, third register from the bottom. I ran my fingers along the carved rows until I felt the sequence change. The rhythm of the symbols, shifting from the standard notation to something older. Something that predated the sanctum by 2 centuries. Something I had carved myself in the first year of this temple's existence and had not touched since. The counter-inscription. I pressed my palm flat against it. The same posture Soren had used in the corridor. The listening posture, but real this time. The actual resonance of someone who belongs to the space, asking the space to remember. The stone was cold. It was supposed to respond. I had keyed it to my own energy 400 years ago, palm contact. Intent, and the stone would recognize me and release the conversion cycle. 3 seconds, perhaps 5. That was how it was designed. The stone did not respond. "It's been rekeyed," Desta said, behind me. Her voice was careful. He found the inscription and rekeyed it. Not to himself hid ability, to the order's symbol, their mark. It will only release for someone carrying their seal. I lifted my hand from the stone. The humming in the walls deepened. "Then I do this differently," I said. I stewed. Turned to face the sanctum's back wall, the oldest wall, the one that had been here before the temple was built around it. The one I did not carve but found, already marked, when I first came to this place. The wall that holds no ceiling symbols because it predates the concept. The wall that the Order does not know about, because every document they have about this temple was written after the outer walls were built. The serpents read what I intended. Threnody uncoiled fully, not from my hair, from the space behind my eyes, the sense extension that goes beyond physical reach. The part of what I am that the myths never described accurately, because no one who saw it up close was left to record it. She reached into the wall, into the stone. The old wall woke. It did not hum, it did not pulse. It simply recognized. The way something dormant recognizes the one who first woke it. And the energy running in reverse through the sealed temple found a countercurrent. An older current, and the 2 systems met inside the stone the way 2 waves meet, and for a moment the whole structure was silent. Then the outer gate unlocked. The bruise light died. The torches returned to blue-white. The pressure at my chest and shoulders dissolved, and I could breathe at the full depth of my lungs. And the serpents slowly released from their locked position and began to move again, cautiously, the way animals test ground after a tremor. Desta let out a breath that had been held for a very long time. I stood in the sanctum and felt the specific exhaustion of having used the oldest part of what I am. It costs differently than other things. Not pain, distance. A sense of having pulled something up from a very deep place and not entirely replaced the ground above it. He's already gone, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. The seal was broken. The conversion cycle interrupted. I was free. But the wreck-eyed counter-inscription meant Soren had been in the sanctum, in the most protected chamber of the temple, without my knowledge. Long enough to find and modify a 400-year-old encryption. He had not just read the walls, he had rewritten them. Desta was still standing at the sanctum entrance. She had followed me in. She had known about the archive room, the order, the counter-inscription, the chamber. She had arrived ahead of Soren with information that had, perhaps, been precisely enough, helped to allow me to break the seal, without giving me the information that would have allowed me to prevent Soren's access to the sanctum entirely. I looked at her. You arrived ahead of him, I said. Tara won me. Yes, she said. And you waited in the archive room, I said, for a full day, instead of warning me. The pause was exactly one breath long. Desta said, I needed to see what he would do. The sanctum was cold now, the conversion cycle's residue, the chill that follows any sustained energy inversion. The torches had stabilized, but their light had a quality I didn't like. A flatness, as if the room was still remembering what had just been done to it. You used me, I said. I observed, she said. The distinction, I said, is yours. She had the honesty not to argue. I walked out of the sanctum, through the corridor, into the outer hall. I needed the space of rooms, the floor, the sound of footsteps, telling me where I was. When I am very still and very angry, the serpents become unpredictable in a way that has consequences I prefer to avoid. Movement helps. Desta followed. Of course she did. Who sent you? I said, walking, not turning. No one, she said. I came because I found the Order's documents. I used to be their archivist. A pause. Until I understood what they were planning. And what are they planning? To open the chamber, she said. But that's not the worst of it. I stopped. The chamber holds a binding, I said. Sealed for 100 years ago. Whatever is inside it does not need to be opened. They don't want to open what's inside, Desta said. They want to use the binding itself. The seal you placed, the method you used, the specific structure of a containment worked by someone immortal. They want to study it, replicate it. She stopped. They want to know how to seal something the way you seal something, permanently, with no counter-inscription. Nuhilizi. The outer hall was very quiet. What do they want to seal? I said. A person, she said. The knowledge arrived in the body before it arrived in the mind. A physical sensation, cold, moving upward from the sternum. Lyra, with her amber eyes, and her careful questions and her warning that I hadn't heard properly. Lyra, with the luminescence, still threaded through her healed shoulder. Lyra, who had been in the temple for 3 days. Breathing the sanctum air, acclimating to its energy with the specific receptivity of a child's body, which absorbs and retains. She wasn't just leverage, she was the vessel. The Order needed someone already bonded to the temple's energy, already carrying a trace of immortal work. Healing, to serve as the anchor point for a permanent binding. Not sealed in the chamber, sealed as the chamber. A human body converted into a living containment structure using my own template. A child's body. Because a child's body holds new energy more completely than an adult's. Because a child's body had not yet spent decades building the internal architecture that resists foreign structure. Because Lyra had brown eyes that looked amber in certain light and had sat beside me on the stone bench before dawn and had told me he said I was lonely, and I had felt, for one unguarded moment, that perhaps she was right. They had chosen her because she was the kind of child I would let in. How long has she been with him? I said. Desta hesitated. How long? I said. 3 years, Desta said. She has been with him since she was 4. The floor held me. The walls held the torches. The temple remained exactly as it was, unchanged, indifferent. Only me, in the center of it, with the understanding arriving in full. Lyra had not been used as a tool for 3 days. She had been shaped as a tool for 3 years. Everything she was, the careful questions, the quiet warning, the way she sat beside me without asking permission, had been cultivated, practiced, directed. She was 7 years old and she had been in his hands since she was 4. She tried to warn me, I said. It came out low. Maybe, Desta said. Children who have been shaped like that, it's hard to know where the shaping ends and where they begin. She might have wanted to warn you. She might have been testing you. She might have been doing both simultaneously without knowing. A pause. She might not have known there was a difference. The rupture of it was specific. Not dramatic. Clean. The way a bone breaks along a pre-existing fracture line, suddenly, and at exactly the point that was always weakest. I had opened the gate for a wounded child. And the wound had been real and I had healed it, and that healing had been used. The truest thing I had done in this entire episode, the healing, had been the most useful thing for the people who wanted to destroy her. My care had been the mechanism. I went after them. Not with a plan. With direction out the gate, onto the road following the mud track that 2 sets of footprints had made heading north. The rain had stopped, but the ground held memory. Threnody extended forward, reading the air. The other serpents fanned outward in their tracking configuration. The wide sense net that can locate a specific human's energy signature at a 1/4 mile in still conditions. Lyra was still carrying the temple's luminescence. She was trackable. I found them before the road bent. Soren was standing in the center of the road with the satchel at his feet, and Lyra beside him and both hands raised, not in surrender. In the posture of someone signaling that the conversation they expected is now beginning. He had stopped and waited. He had known I would come. I need you to listen, he said. Give me the child, I said. She's not. Give me the child. Lyra looked at me. Her expression was the one I had seen in the garden, sorting, measuring, calculating which kind of truth the adult was telling. She was 7 years old and she was doing this, automatically, without even recognizing it as unusual, because she had been doing it since she was 4. She won't be harmed, Soren said. The binding procedure is painless. She would live a normal life. She would simply also be an anchor for a permanent seal, I said. A pause. He recalculated. She would be protected, he said, by the Order, for life. The Order, I said, sent you to steal a map from my home. Used a 7-year-old as the delivery mechanism. And you are telling me what the Order promises. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face. not guilt, not remorse, something more complicated. The expression of a man who has believed in a thing for long enough that questioning it feels like violence against himself. "Give her to me," I said. "Walk away." "That's all." He picked up the satchel. "I can't," he said. "If I come back without her, then don't go back," I said. The pause this time was long enough to have weather in it. He looked at Lyra. She was watching the serpents, specifically Threnody, who had extended to her full length and was hovering in the air between us, head angled toward Soren, reading him with the patience of something that has read thousands of men and found most of them to be exactly what they appeared. "She already knows," Lyra said. "To Soren, not to me." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said. He put the satchel down, stepped back from it, looked at Lyra one more time, and I watched his face in that moment. The full weight of 3 years of whatever he had felt for her that was real alongside whatever he had done that was not. Both things true simultaneously, the way people are true. And then he turned and walked away down the road. Lyra stood in the road I came to hoe. I crouched so that we were the same height. Her shoulder glowed faintly in the morning light, the bond still present, still warm, still mine to undo, if she was willing. "Does it hurt?" I asked. She shook her head. "I can remove it," I said. The warmth, the connection to the temple. It would be like it was before. She looked at me, sorted. "Would I be able to come back?" she said. "Yes," I said. It cost me nothing to say it, and everything to mean it. "Then not yet," she said. She picked up the satchel, too heavy for her, listing sideways with the weight of it, and carried it toward the temple gate. And I watched her go, and the serpents watched with me, and the road was very quiet. Inside the satchel, still undiscovered, was a second letter. And the thing I didn't know, couldn't have known, wouldn't know until I opened it, was that its existence meant the Order had not been watching my temple for 200 years. They had been in contact with someone who had been inside it for 400 years, since before the first stone was placed. 3 weeks after Soren walked away, I burned the stone fragment. I did it in the outer courtyard, in a clay vessel, with salt and the ash of a cypress branch, the way you destroy things you want to ensure stay destroyed. The wax cast I had already dissolved in the first hour. The sealed letter from someone in the Order's hierarchy. Commissioning the map retrieval, I read once and burned without copying. The counter-inscription on the altar base, I recarved myself, deeper this time, using my own notation rather than the standard sequence, so that no archivist with a 200-year-old document could find and rekey it again. The crack in the sanctum floor I filled with copper poured hot, a seal over a seal. The chamber beneath unmarked and unreachable and remaining that way. I did not undo Lyra's bond. She asked me not to, and I honored it. And every morning she came to the outer garden at the hour before sunrise and sat on the stone bench, and we did not always speak, but we were always there. The two of us, and the gray light, and the serpents slowly settling after the restless hours before dawn. She was 7 years old. She had been shaped for 3 years into something she didn't have the language to name. Every morning that she sat in that garden was a morning she was something else, not undoing what had been done. Because that is not how people work, but adding to herself, layering, becoming incrementally more than what she had been designed to be. I watched it happen. It was the truest thing that occurred in all of this. The crack in the sanctum floor ran directly above the sealed chamber, and in the weeks after Soren's departure, I traced it daily. On the 19th day, it stopped spreading. On the 21st, very, very so close, The chamber was intact. Whatever I had sealed 400 years ago was still sealed. But the order now knew where it was. The irony, the one that stays, the one that has the shape of a lesson I already knew and failed to apply, is this. I let him in because he arrived with a wounded child. I was moved by the child. The child was the door. And I had turned men to stone for arriving at this gate, with less preparation than he had. Men who came with weapons, with demands, with the obvious architecture of threat. I had read their intentions in their posture, and acted accordingly, and lost nothing. The one I let in arrived without a weapon. He arrived with open hands and a child's weight against his chest, and the specific patience of someone who had studied what would move me. He arrived speaking the language of care, not performed care. Not obviously performed, but the language of it. Fluent and measured and real enough that I could not distinguish it from the genuine thing. 3 centuries. And what it took was a man who had done his homework, not because I was foolish, because I was lonely. Those are different diagnoses, and they required different remedies, and I had, for 300 years, been treating the second one as if it were the first. I opened the second letter on the 22nd day. I had been carrying it since the road, tucked inside the clay vessel where I kept small things I wasn't ready to address. The handwriting on the outside had been enough to stop me. I recognized it the way you recognize the gait of someone you haven't seen in a long time. Something in the body knows before the mind confirms. I opened it, read it, set it down on the altar, stood there in the sanctum, in the blue-white torchlight, with the filled crack in the floor beneath my feet, and Lyra asleep in the small room off. The outer hall and the serpents very quiet, and felt the world rearrange itself around a new fact. The letter was not from the Order. The letter was from someone who had been providing the Order with information about this temple for 400 years. Not a member, a source, a person who had access, continuous, undetected, intimate access to every significant event in the history of this place. The letter was written to Soren, not the Order, Soren personally. It said, "You were right to trust the child. She will remember. Make sure she does." The handwriting belonged to the woman who had been my first acolyte, who had left this temple in the year it was founded, who had died. I had been told, I had believed, I had mourned on the road north, the winter of the temple's first year. Apparently not. On the 28th day, a traveler came to the outer gate. Woman, older, travel-worn, with a scholar's satchel, different woman, but the posture identical to Destus, both hands visible, eyes direct, the stance of someone who has prepared for this moment and is choosing transparency as a strategy. She was not Desta. I had never seen her before. She looked at me through the gate with the specific expression of someone who has been given a description and is now verifying it against the reality. "I was sent to retrieve the child," she said, "not by the Order. The Order," she explained, "had been disbanded 3 weeks ago by someone with the authority to disband it. Someone who had been above it for a very long time without appearing in any of its documents. Sent by whom?" I said. She reached into her satchel, produced a letter, held it through the bars of the gate so I could read the seal without touching it. The seal was mine. Not the temple's seal, mine. The personal mark I had used before this temple existed, in the years when I was moving between shores and had not yet chosen a place to stop. A mark I had used for perhaps 20 years, 400 years ago, and then retired. A mark I had told no one about, recorded nowhere, carried in no document. A mark that only I should have known. She said you would know what this means, the woman said. I looked at the seal, looked at her. Who is Ice? The woman looked at me steadily. And then she said to tell you, you sealed the wrong thing. The gate stayed closed. I stood at it until the woman walked away, until the road was empty in both directions, until the only sound was the wind in the courtyard's cypresses and Lyra's voice from inside the temple, talking to Vex, the small copper serpent who had taken to curling in Lyra's hair in the mornings, which Lyra found funny and Vex found acceptable. I held the words, "You sealed the wrong thing." For centuries, everything inside the chamber beneath, the sanctum, sealed with the most permanent binding I knew how to work, using the full weight of what I am, at a cost I had chosen not to reckon since. What was in there, I had sealed because I believed it was dangerous. Someone was now telling me I had been wrong, and that someone carried my own oldest mark, and had been watching this temple since its first stone, and had spent 400 years feeding information to an order that I thought had tried to steal from me, but had perhaps been trying, clumsily, destructively, through the body of a 7-year-old child, to get my attention. I did not know what I had sealed. I was no longer certain I had been right to seal it. And whoever had sent that woman knew both things, and had been waiting 400 years for me to arrive at exactly this understanding. Some knowledge arrives too late to change the past. It arrives only in time to change what you do next. And what comes next, that is where the real cost begins. If this story reached your heart, leave us a like and share it. What would you have done? And don't miss what comes next, another memory Medusa never forgot.